The restaurant looked like a place where only the richest people came to eat. Everything inside was shiny and expensive. The lights were warm and low, the tables were covered with white cloth, and the guests talked in soft voices as if their words were more important than anyone else's. At one side of the room stood a black piano. Most days, no one touched it. It was only there to make the place look classy. The waitress moved from table to table, doing her job quietly. She didn't talk much. She just focused on carrying plates and glasses, hoping the night would pass quickly. She needed the money, so she tried to stay calm even when the guests were rude or demanding. She had learned long ago that in places like this, people didn't look at her the way they looked at each other. To them, she was just someone who brought the food and disappeared. What no one knew was that a long time ago, she used to love music. She had grown up playing the piano every day. It was the one thing that made her heart feel light. But life had changed. There had been problems, responsibilities, and bills that kept coming. At some point, the piano became a luxury she couldn't afford anymore. She had stopped playing completely, locking away that part of her life like it belonged to someone else. Tonight felt like any other work night. The guests were a mixture of business people, travelers, and a few who came just to show off their status. One group in particular sat near the center of the room. They were loud and full of confidence, talking in a way that made everyone else feel small. One of the men in that group had a big voice, the type that filled the whole space even when he wasn't trying. He laughed loudly at his own jokes, even when no one else found them funny. At one point, he noticed the piano sitting in the corner. He raised his eyebrow as if he had just discovered something amusing. He pointed toward it and said to his friends, "Look at that thing. I swear, every fancy place has one. But does anyone here even know how to play it?" His friends laughed with him, though not because they agreed, only because he expected them to as the waitress passed by their table. Balancing a tray with empty glasses, the man suddenly turned to her. "Hey, you," he said, almost like calling a pet. "Do you know how to play that thing? Or do you just serve water?" She stopped, more out of shock than anything else. She didn't expect anyone to speak to her that way. She didn't even know how to answer. She wanted to keep walking, pretend she didn't hear him, but he wasn't the type to let anything go. His friends looked at her too, waiting for the show. "I'm just doing my job." "Sir?" she said softly. "That wasn't the question," he replied, leaning back in his chair as if this was part of his entertainment. "Come on, play something for us. Let's see what you've got." She felt her face grow warm with embarrassment. She didn't want attention. She didn't want anyone staring at her. She especially didn't want to be mocked by people who thought she was beneath them. But she also knew she couldn't talk back. She needed this job more than her pride. Her manager, who had been watching from a distance, gave her a look. It wasn't a helpful look. It was more of a silent request. Just do it. Don't cause trouble. This was the kind of restaurant where the customer was always right, even when they clearly weren't. She took a quiet breath. "Sir, I haven't played in a long time," she said. The man smirked. "That's fine. We're not expecting much. It's just for fun." The words hit her harder than he realized. He didn't care about her talent. He just wanted something to laugh at. She could see it written all over his face. The people at the other tables were already turning their heads, whispering to each other, waiting to see what would happen. She forced her legs to move. The walk to the piano felt longer than it should have. She could feel every pair of eyes on her. Some looked curious, some amused, and a few looked uncomfortable, as if they knew this wasn't right. But no one said anything. No one wanted to get involved. When she reached the piano, she stood there for a moment, staring at it. She hadn't touched an instrument in years. Her hands were trembling slightly, not just from fear, but from a flood of memories she had pushed away for so long. She remembered the small apartment where she used to practice. She remembered the music sheets scattered across her bed. She remembered the feeling of losing herself in melodies that made her forget about the world. Now she was being forced to play in front of strangers, who expected her to fail. She sat down slowly on the piano bench. It felt unfamiliar, almost cold. She placed her shaking hands on her lap for a moment and tried to calm her breathing. She didn't want to cry. Not here. Not in front of them. Behind her, she could still hear the guests talking, but the sound felt far away, like she was underwater. The loud man from earlier said something again, but she didn't pay attention to the words. She knew he wasn't expecting anything special. He probably thought she didn't even know what the keys were for. The restaurant grew quieter than usual. Even the waiters had stopped moving. The manager stood near the kitchen door. Hoping this would be over quickly without any complaints, she lifted her hands and placed them gently on the keys. Her fingers hovered there, unsure. She wasn't thinking about impressing anyone. She wasn't thinking about the rude man or the whispers around her. She only thought about the piano itself, an old friend she hadn't seen in a long time. For a few seconds, she just sat there, letting the room breathe. She closed her eyes because it was the only way she felt brave enough to continue. The memories came back like waves-long nights practicing, mornings filled with music, moments where she believed she might actually become someone. She pushed down the first key. The sound was soft. Just a single note, but it rang through the restaurant like something alive. It reminded her of the world she once loved, the world she lost. That first note made her heart squeeze in her chest. She pressed another key. This time it felt a little easier. Her fingers were still shaky, but they knew what to do, even after all the years. The music came back to her like a forgotten language she could still speak, but before she could continue, a thought hit her. She wasn't just playing for herself anymore. Everyone behind her wanted a reason to laugh. She could sense it. A few guests were leaning forward, waiting. Others tilted their heads, trying to guess what she would do next. The pressure was heavy. She didn't know if she should play more or stop right there. It felt like the whole room was holding its breath, waiting to judge her. She took another deep breath. If she played and made a mistake, they would mock her. If she refused, she would be seen as difficult. Either way, she felt trapped. The loud man spoke again, sounding impatient. "Any day now," he said with a small laugh. She didn't react. For the first time that night, she blocked out all the noise. She let her fingers rest on the keys again, just like she used to. The piano felt warm now, familiar, almost comforting. It felt like the one place where she could be herself. Even if just for a moment, she closed her eyes once more. The room was silent. Every guest watched her, waiting to see what she would do next. And just before she began to really play, the kind of music she hadn't touched in years. The scene froze in time. The waitress sat there with her eyes closed, her fingers ready, her heart beating fast. And no one in that room had any idea what was about to happen next. The room was so quiet that the waitress could hear her own heartbeat. Her fingers rested on the piano keys, and for a moment she wondered if she should stop. The weight of everyone's eyes made her nervous again. But then something inside her shifted. She remembered how it felt to play when she was younger, how music used to give her strength. She took one slow breath, opened her eyes just a little, and let her fingers move. The first real line of music floated through the restaurant like a calm wave. It wasn't loud or showy. It was soft, slow, and full of feeling. The kind of sound that makes people stop what they're doing without even realizing it. A few guests lifted their heads. Some straightened in their seats. No one expected that kind of sound from her. Her fingers moved carefully at first, as if they were waking up after a long sleep. Each note blended with the next, forming a melody that felt warm and gentle. It wasn't perfect, but it had real heart. And that was what caught everyone's attention. The man who had pushed her to play stopped smirking. He leaned forward a little, trying to understand what was happening. His friends, who had been ready to laugh, grew quiet too. The room's atmosphere changed so fast that even the kitchen staff peeked out from behind the door. She continued playing. With every passing second, her confidence grew. Her hands stopped shaking. Her posture straightened. The music began to feel natural again, like breathing. She wasn't thinking about the guests anymore or the man who mocked her. She wasn't thinking about her job or her worries. For the first time in a long time, she felt free. The melody deepened. Her fingers moved faster now, as if they had been waiting for years to come alive again. The sound filled the entire restaurant, wrapping around every table, every corner. People who had been talking moments earlier now sat silently, watching in awe. One woman at the front table felt her eyes sting with tears. She wiped them quickly, not wanting anyone to notice. But she couldn't stop the emotion the music brought out in her. Even the lights in the room seemed to glow differently as she played, like they were leaning closer to listen. Meanwhile, the waitress felt something inside her she hadn't felt in years. She felt like herself again, not just a worker rushing from table to table, not someone constantly worrying about bills and responsibilities. She felt like the girl who once believed that music could change her life. And in that moment, the world didn't seem so heavy. She played a part of the melody that rose gently and then fell like a sigh. The room breathed with her. Some guests forgot to blink. Even the wealthy man who had started all of this looked confused by his own reaction. He wasn't expecting anything more than a simple tune. Certainly not something that could silence an entire room. Her music grew stronger, more emotional. It was like she was telling a story through the keys, a story about dreams, loss, hope, and the things people hide inside themselves. Some guests felt a tightness in their chest, even though they couldn't explain why. That was the power of her playing. It touched them in places they didn't expect. The waitress wasn't aware of any of this. She was too lost in the moment. Her eyes stayed half-closed as she continued, letting the music guide her. Every note carried a piece of her past. Every rise in the melody carried her old dreams. Every soft drop held the weight of the years she had spent away from the piano. Eventually, she reached the part of the piece that was the most emotional. It was the part she used to practice late at night when she felt sad or worried. Without realizing it, a tear slipped down her cheek. She didn't stop playing. She didn't even wipe it away. She kept going, letting the feeling pour out through her hands. The guests could hear the emotion in every sound. A few people in the back exchanged glances. They had never seen anything like this in a restaurant. This wasn't entertainment. This wasn't a performance forced by a rude customer. This was something much deeper. As she continued, the loud man who had mocked her earlier felt his confidence crumble. He rubbed his hands together, looked down at the table, and shifted in his seat. He didn't know how to handle what he was seeing. He wasn't used to being wrong, and he certainly wasn't used to being humbled by someone he had underestimated. His friends sat quietly, too, unsure of what to say. They began to feel embarrassed for encouraging him earlier. The atmosphere had changed so completely that no one dared whisper. The waitress reached the final part of the song. Her fingers slowed. The melody softened, becoming delicate again. It felt like she was gently closing a book she had opened after many years. She played the last few notes carefully, letting them linger in the air, and then she played the final note. It hung in the room for what felt like a full minute. No one moved. No one spoke. The silence was deep and full, not empty. It was the kind of silence that only comes after something meaningful. She sat there with her hands still resting on the keys. She didn't look up right away. She didn't know what to expect. A part of her feared laughter or criticism. Another part of her hoped, just a little, for something kinder when she finally lifted her head. She was surprised. Every single guest in the restaurant was staring at her, not with judgment, not with amusement, but with pure shock and admiration, and then the entire room began to clap. It wasn't like clapping. It wasn't the forced applause people give to be polite. It was real, loud, full of emotion. Some guests even stood from their seats, giving her a standing ovation. The sound washed over her and she felt her chest tighten again. But this time for a good reason. The manager, who had been frozen near the kitchen door, looked stunned. He had never known she could play like that. He didn't even know she knew how to play at all. He walked forward slowly, unsure what to say. The woman who had wiped her tears earlier now clapped with both hands, shaking her head as if she still couldn't believe what she heard. Even the loud man stood up, though not proudly. He looked awkward and ashamed. He walked toward the piano slowly. The room watched, wondering what he would say. When he reached her, he took a breath and lowered his voice. I didn't expect that," he said. His tone was soft, almost apologetic. "You're incredible." He looked down, embarrassed. I shouldn't have pushed you like that. It wasn't a full apology, but it was the closest he had ever come to one. She nodded politely, not wanting to embarrass him further. She wasn't angry. She just felt relieved. Relieved that she had found the courage to play. Relieved that she still had the music in her. Relieved that the people who mocked her were now the ones who couldn't speak. A few guests approached her next. One man asked where she learned to play. Another said her performance reminded him of a moment from his childhood. A woman told her the music touched her heart. She didn't know how to respond to all of them. She just smiled softly and thanked them. Then one older guest stepped forward, someone who had been watching quietly from the back. He introduced himself not with a title or wealth, but simply as someone who loved music. He told her he taught piano and had connections with people in the music world. He looked at her with kind eyes and said, "If you ever want to start again, I'd be happy to help." The waitress didn't know what to say. She felt overwhelmed. She had walked into this night expecting nothing more than a long shift of work. And now someone was offering her a chance she thought she had? Lost forever, she thanked him with a shaky voice. The room slowly returned to normal. The guests went back to their meals. But the atmosphere was different now, softer, warmer. People spoke in quieter tones, still thinking about what they had just heard. Some guests kept glancing at her as if she had performed a miracle. For the rest of the night, she worked with a lightness she hadn't felt in years. Her steps felt easier. Her breath felt calmer. Every time she passed the piano, she felt a small smile tug at her lips when her shift finally ended, and she walked out of the restaurant into the cool night air. She felt something she hadn't felt in a long time, hope. She knew life wouldn't magically become perfect. She still had responsibilities and challenges waiting for her. But something inside her had awakened. She remembered who she was before life became heavy. And she knew now that her dreams weren't completely gone. They had just been sleeping, waiting for the right moment to wake up again. That night, the waitress walked home with a quiet smile, feeling lighter than she had in years. And everyone who had watched her play would remember that performance because it wasn't just music. It was a moment that showed the whole room that real talent doesn't need permission to shine.